you. I'm going to go ahead and I think it was a good catch. I don't think I hit record. Usually does it automatically. Appreciate that though. Make sure that everybody gets a chance to see that. Thanks though. So we were at number 5, affordable housing innovation. Number 6, finding diverse sites. You have a plethora of different types of land uses, from large industries to micro farming. So there's plenty of opportunity there, plenty of opportunity in the land availability. Just a matter of putting those underneath projects. And then necessitating on-site community amenities, which is something that a lot of folks are doing out there. We know it's happening. So when you do a project, make sure that you get don't miss an opportunity to put amenities on site, whether that's typically what we're hearing is childcare, community space, technology space, classroom space, learning space, those kinds of things that make sure that you have actual healthy project in a healthy neighborhood that's contributing to long-term human and social health. And then state level support, as you all know, is always a struggle and has become more lately, but there's great statewide groups, state level groups that are doing good work out there. So supporting them in their efforts to make legislative changes, which we have a couple of recommendations of too. And also finally, the rate of costs going up. It's not just the costs themselves, but it's the lag time between costs increasing and being able to have the marketplace and other places adjust to those costs when inventory and things are so low. So we're going to touch really quick on a couple of, I'll have Carson talk really quickly on the upshot of what the data kind of says as we set these things up county by county. And then I'll go into a little bit more of the land use and land suitability side. So Carson, if you could.
Sure. Yep. Thanks, Dave. So starting with Bighorn County here, I would say of all the counties in the region, Bighorn County has had a fairly limited amount of growth, both in terms of employment and housing unit growth. Not a lot of new residents coming in and driving demand for housing. And I think as we'll talk about with some of the prototypes, the issue here is not demand outpacing supply, but supply not being adequate to meet current needs and longstanding needs with various infrastructure issues and so on. So that's the upshot with Bighorn County and the Crow Reservation.
And we were looking for opportunities. Obviously, there's massive challenges down here with materials, with costs, and everything else. As we know, there's land is typically available, but infrastructure is really the big issue with Bighorn County and the reservation. A lot of great efforts are being made. A lot of federal and state money is going toward improving water infrastructure, in particular with the new treatment plant by Yellowtail. But any place we can find that can help leverage infrastructure is where we were trying to seek opportunities here. And this is just an example of the Two Rivers Industrial Park Master Plan that was done a couple of years back that did identify early looks at where could multifamily expand as they did their big 12-inch loop around the entire community. Let's leverage that. Let's tap into those resources as they're already being allocated for other things, get economies of scale and function for some of these projects. And this is our first example of the land suitability map if you haven't seen these yet. So what we did is we used GIS, Geographic Information Systems, to layer on all of these parameters, all as much of a science as we could do, but also a lot of times there is a little bit of an art form to this piece. Knowing things like where is infrastructure, what is the infrastructure status, what's its condition, where are the institutional lands and properties. So we looked at the old hospital. There's a helipad that's actually on an old residential lot, house probably burned down or something. They have an immediate need, so let's recognize that need and let's try to leverage their ownership of that and work with them to maybe put some modulars on there or something to get that short-term need met because of the urgency of that. So likewise with the high school, we know that they have expansion plans and schools need parking and those kinds of things. But the need is so urgent for housing that might be an opportunity to get teacher housing nearby where they work, and that's certainly something that we also promote is walkability. So we're looking at clustered downtown lots too. Some of these are very small and the feasibility gets difficult, but a lot of these are county-owned parcels, and we want to promote walkable, dense, smart kind of growth, small town growth, support the Main Street as time goes on. And then also things like rehabilitation of mobile home parks, and not necessarily, some of these things are just an urgent need of funds and programs, which there are, to bring them up to healthy standards of living. So we've tried to explore all these options as we put these maps together. Typically we had between 8 and a dozen sites for each one of these. So we looked at Crow Agency as well. There's a couple of projects that are kind of always in the works, but let's leverage the existing infrastructure where those projects are to maybe think about a different type of modular, perhaps construction or types of. There's already plenty of modulars out there. Let's use the local community development corporation. Let's look at there's a couple of great case studies. The Good Earth Lodges are one that we'll point to here in a second. And let's try to find out a spectrum of sites so that the community can take these things and with the backing and the due diligence done through somewhat of a scientific and land use study, that these are valid sites for further exploration. And we'll show you how that might work in a second too. We also looked at lodge grass and spoke with the mayor, spoke with other representatives and the county commissioners there, and we, they've recognized a couple places where infrastructure might be extended. We want to make sure that if it is, there's not just one site. Maybe there's a phasing to get this core area of former platted sites with new infrastructure to them. That could be a new cluster of homes that is walkable to some of the amenities in town there and close to the schools and everything else. So quick takeaways here. There's a study out of University of Colorado that said there's something like 1,300 to 1,500 units of backlog. So that just kind of blows out any data now south of the water. So it's just immediate need for safe and healthy units. So let's look at different ways to supply housing. And it doesn't need to be new. It might need to be rehabilitation. Infrastructure is huge in this county and in the reservation. That's the biggest infrastructure needs are here. So when you're thinking about what's step one, let's make sure infrastructure is safe and healthy, and then the housing will be able to leverage some of those investments. Rehabilitation I mentioned, and we'll show you some of the concepts about how there might be precedent, or there is precedent for innovation using the Good Earth Lodges I mentioned, use compressed earth construction, traditional construction techniques. And they leveraged available land, and they also leveraged partnerships with institutions there that particular project, which is linked in the study, does show how you can use local labor, local folks to provide jobs and to kind of teach and educate. And anytime you can do that, obviously, absolutely leverage that, and it reduces costs and it helps out everybody. Carbon County, Carson, quickly go ahead, give us the upshot.
Yeah, Dave, I got a question. Could we zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, you bet. Let's see, I can adjust it for you as needed here.
Maybe not that much.
Okay, let me see if I can change this.
That I think that's good.
Just a second here. I'll figure out a full screen here in a second. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. So I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit about Carbon County. So, Carbon County, I think of all the counties, is seeing pretty rapid home sale price, housing cost escalation, as you can see with sale price trend, and also, the housing sale distribution by area median income, relative to the incomes there. The housing is increasingly unaffordable, and as I'm sure a lot of you have heard, the area has been experiencing a lot of growth recently, whether that's through just a fairly strong economy, good employment growth, but also thinking about like COVID and the Zoom town boom, a lot of in-migration from places both in and out of state, and in an amenity-rich community like Red Lodge. The extent to which that will last, I think, in Carbon County, as it is across the West, is a little bit uncertain right now. But the housing market has definitely felt the effects, and everything the data and just talking to people tell us that the rental market is incredibly tight, and it's increasingly difficult to find an economical one-bedroom apartment or a house with a bedroom in it to live in. So it's definitely one of the tighter markets of all of the ones that we've looked at.
Okay, from a land suitability perspective, we looked at Red Lodge and Joliet, but using our same parameters. We applied these similarly, and then sort of tested them with local community members, staff. This is the town is compact. It sits in between the benches there, but there are one of the storylines is that there's plenty of opportunities for adaptive reuse, which I think is a major exploratory exercise that you should consider, and it's been considered in Red Lodge for a long time. People have been trying to do something with the old hospital. A number of reasons that hasn't worked, but now more than ever, since the need is so high, values are starting to increase. That might give you some momentum to do something. And save some of the historic character even in the community, which we heard loud and clear. Red Lodge is a compact town. It's got an old plat, old Main Street, no stoplights. People want to keep it that way, but still figure out a way to get projects in. There might be opportunities to do stuff up on the bench. Maybe not certainly these whole big sites up here, but just a portion of them. Those are legal parcels, so we wanted to take looking at how they fit the parameters. There's existing housing nearby. All these things kind of factored into these maps here, as well as school district ownership and other things, just proximity to other housing, multifamily housing projects. Joliet, challenges are massive in Joliet, obviously, just because of a number of things, actually, water, physical constraints, and then just the highway going through town and crossing, and that's been kind of a safety issue there for a while. But if you start to look at the same parameters, there are a couple of sites that do appear to be meet kind of that opportunistic standard, but a lot of them are private in Joliet, so it's kind of a challenge too. There's a school district property up there that might be interesting, but a lot of private property which has its own set of challenges. Infrastructure is always huge too, so in Joliet. But quick carbon takeaways. Let's look at those adaptive reuse options. Really great opportunities there to do something really cool that's meaningful for the community. The R4 zoning it seems like a good district, so let's look at leveraging some of those zone districts to get one of those small to medium-sized multifamily projects. And that's not in the core area. The core area does encourage mixed use and historic scaled mixed use, but that R4 zoning seems like it might be the appropriate one. In Red Lodge, at least. Let's help employers build it themselves, as I mentioned, right-sized projects to fit character. And Carbon County, well, Red Lodge in particular has some challenges with conveying land for projects. They have to do it at market rate, but there are still ways we think that you could do long-term leases or other kinds of models that would still would help you with the fact that there's just not a lot of public or institutional land in that community. Stillwater County.
Yeah. So a little bit about Stillwater County. Also experienced quite a bit of appreciation in recent years. Thinking about big picture here, not only has the population grown, but you have demand drivers from the Stillwater mine, and the gradual expansion of that, I think, has put more and more pressure on the housing market. And has put pressure on the ability of people employed in Stillwater County to live near their place of employment. There's a fair amount of commuting to the mining jobs in Stillwater County, and as you can see in that chart in the bottom right, mining employment ebbs and flows, but in recent years it's really grown considerably, and that of course has that kind of household formation. Those are fairly high wage jobs. Has an effect on the housing market. And I think one of the things that we've thought about is like the affordability gap between what's available in the market and what people make in a lot of those jobs isn't that big. There's just not a huge inventory available. So we really see that Stillwater County as being an inventory-centric problem. And another thing to consider, which we've looked at a little bit, but still I think would need additional research, is the extent to which cross commuting from Bozeman, for example, and Billings might affect housing demand here. As Bozeman, as you all know, is incredibly unaffordable at this point. As people might move out of there for cost reasons, Stillwater County could be a possible destination for that.
Absolutely. Same with Sweetgrass, which has similar conditions, even closer to Bozeman. Land suitability map, we looked at Absaroka with their improvements to their water districts, or their special districts there. We know it's kind of been a very desirable place, and it will continue to be, even though it's small and unincorporated. But they might have some of the things, framework in place to do some kind of workforce or support their workforce housing. with its own unique conditions of being unincorporated. Obviously, so there's there's some school district land out here, and we were kind of interested in the old Sandstone School as a historic property, and seeking opportunities or ways to look at that in a way that could provide almost a new community center, which I know people are looking at that as kind of we speak. But wanted to make sure we had a good look at an interesting community like this that is unincorporated. And then Columbus, there's a lot going on in Columbus, it seems like, and if there's not today, there will be tomorrow, or it's in the works. So looking at some of the parameters, a lot of these are annexation properties. So that's kind of an interesting a piece of it, but you do have institutional land here as the community, and this is one of the more recent, I think it's modular single family subdivision. Looking at smart growth, there's a logical way to extend looking at the community's future. And then there's other interesting pieces here. We know that some folks are trying to get projects done at the market rate, but there's opportunities near existing. I think this is existing multifamily down here, and then wanted to make sure took a look at the core properties that no opportunity got left off the table to again promote that walkability. That maybe not in 1 year, but in 5 or 10 years, since these places are growing kind of considerably compared to their size. Want to promote downtown growth as well. Lots of opportunity sites in Stillwater. Not a whole lot of diversity of housing types. There's just a couple multifamily units that we saw, according to the tax assessor's roles. Really need a catalyst in these places more than maybe some others, just because you need to really push the boundary on multifamily, I think, to have that kind of pioneer in the marketplace. Seems like, because some of the reasons Carson mentioned, a community land trust model, it seems like the kind of permanent ownership model might work there. You kind of you're surrounded by community land trusts, so that's an opportunity there that you might see. And then try to get that density up by getting smaller lots and smaller units in there, so that people want that single family home ownership in Columbus, Stillwater. But if we can get the market side, the square footage down, the cost down, then maybe there's a way to do that with not having as huge of a subsidy gap or gap financing. All right, Carson, Sweetgrass.
Yep. So, Sweetgrass County, being the smallest county in the region in terms of population, I think it's seen a fairly steady amount of growth. Doesn't quite have the employment drivers as other parts of the region, like Stillwater County or like Yellowstone County, but nonetheless has seen some amount of housing cost escalation, as well as a fairly limited supply of available options for people. And as I mentioned with Stillwater, also to an extent in Big Timber and Sweetgrass, being right on the interstate, I-90, you have the potential for future growth coming from Bozeman, as people get priced out of that market and look elsewhere. So that's just something to consider moving forward as we think about how are our solutions and our ideas today meeting the need 3, 4, 5 years down the road from now.
Yep, in the crosshairs, as we call it. Look, so Big Timber, Columbus have similar makeup. There's a little bit of an outdated zoning code that might be preventing some of that ability to do that middle scale, that smaller to middle scale project multifamily. That you might need to consider some zoning amendments, which I think we pointed out as opportunities. But there is some ideal sites along on the old highway, and then as you can sort of have this critical mass of already getting apartments down here by the interstate too, with that good visibility, good access, as mentioned, to both Bozeman and job centers and buildings. This is just an example of another piece of information we include. It's just snapshots of the sites. This is, I think, just a good way to line up these sites with actual places, and there's some rehabilitation options perhaps, or just underutilized or vacant lands, parking lots. Certainly in the downtown Big Timber, taking parking lots away, it can be trouble for retailers. But again, to have that historic scale. Perhaps mixed use multifamily building type. Maybe not next year, but 5 years down the road, or maybe something in between. Like I said, caught in the crosshairs. There's actually a lot of vacancy, interestingly, in Sweetgrass County for a number of reasons. It might even be more of that, I don't know, second home market growing out there. So kind of need to look at some of those. There's probably other infrastructure tools that you could utilize here. You know, if you really want to, the county, the city, the town wants to support maybe in some way some of this new Zoom town type of thing, kind of like Red Lodge has that at part of the economy. There's certain broadband or other types of technology that they could leverage as far as infrastructure that's not called water and sewer or roads. So multifamily opportunities, that's pretty much it. You know, one project in Big Timber might do move the needle quite a bit. And then the interstate and the highway corridors with that zone change might have a big effect on supply. And finally, our last county, Yellowstone County.
Yellowstone County, which y'all are super familiar with. Yeah, so largest county in the region, certainly in terms of population, with Billings, biggest city in the state, located here. And, you know, one of the ways that we've thought about this, you know, analyzing the trends throughout the process is that, you know, Billings is historically a relatively affordable city in Montana and in the West. And I think, you know, a lot of its economic competitiveness and its character is really grounded in that relative degree of affordability, certainly compared to Bozeman or Missoula. And however, you know, as a lot of the data shows us, that's changing, right? You know, home prices have escalated pretty substantially over the past 5 or so years. It's gradually becoming less and less affordable to the types of people who work there. If you look at the chart in the top right, Dave, if you could scroll up, thinking about like what are major occupations that, you know, that are crucial, that are essential to the function of a place like Billings, like nurses, truck drivers, construction workers, teachers. Like for a lot of those, you know, incomes have not kept up with the income that someone would need to afford a home at the median sale price. And, you know, just thinking about fusing the data with what we know about you know, development patterns, I think something we've heard pretty regularly is that a lot of the development that's going on is of large lot, you know, larger homes, a little more like sprawl centric. And, you know, with an influx of growth, with job growth, that, you know, puts pressure on the housing market, we have to think about, you know, ways to, you know, ensure that demand is met with a, you know, economical housing stock, not just a large lot housing stock, to absorb that. And so that's just a way that we've framed this discussion, as, you know, the area is growing, and, you know, all signs indicate to Billings and Yellowstone County continuing to grow and continuing to be a desirable place for people to move to and stay in.
Thank you. Looking at that land suitability land analysis in Billings is very interesting. There's plenty of if you just use the same parameters as every other community that we looked at, this whole screen, as I say, would light up. There's plenty of things that meet the parameters, but for a number of reasons, not all of them were certainly appropriate for workforce affordable subsidized housing, and for a number of those reasons that might be you're not seeing inventory like you should. But we tried to pick a spectrum as we looked across the landscape, and not just look at downtown and the center or even the west, but looking in places like Lockwood was really kind of rose up on the radar. We worked with, I see Patty's on the line, and other folks to see if there were opportunities to leverage what Lockwood's got going on, and spread that kind of that opportunistic site looks to create new neighborhoods, new residential areas. And we looked at eBird, we looked at the urban renewal districts as they start to get their increment financing bank going. We haven't seen a lot of it in the recent years, but looking 5 years down the road. But there were some sites there, former industrial sites, possibly brownfield sites that you could use other federal state grant funds for to clean up, and everything that helps your bottom line helps theirs too. So we know the Inner Belt Loop project is going to be coming around, connecting to Highway 3 over here. Wanted to at least take a look and test some of these sites for their validity, and then looking at some of the growth just on the west end, to again just demonstrate some of these forces and market forces at play to see how we can bring some of these things into reality. And then of course the community development has their land banking program, so I wanted to identify those sites, test them against the numbers, so on. And then Laurel as well, with some of the new projects that are happening in Laurel, you're kind of getting a critical mass of multifamily right here, which is a great walkable location. Let's leverage some of that momentum. There are a number of other projects that are kind of happening up within the city limits, and within they have big plans for the redevelopment of these areas. There's potentially some grant or TIF funding, I think, available. And we know that some of these sites did have interest in them as we spoke to stakeholders and others and staff. So again, put them on the, let's make them meet the parameters, or see how they meet the parameters, and let's test them and see where we go from there. Yellowstone takeaways, and there's a lot to Yellowstone because it is the biggest. So, but we had our 5 counties, so I had to kind of like spread out our obviously our scope evenly. So, but just some of our quick takeaways from Yellowstone. There is a good framework in place when you look at land use. So that you just need that catalyst, or that be opportunistic to make some of those sites work, which means maybe finding unconventional sites. And we know that the city is looking at all of its park and recreation, city-owned parks, and maybe looking at a future planning consolidation or program that we could use those sites to either trade, bank, or otherwise use to finance housing. Whether even if it's on the site itself, there might be opportunities there. Usually parks are in good residential locations and so on. So let's use TIF as a catalyst. Number 3, target those urban renewal areas. The project would catalyze growth. The growth would catalyze the project. So those are huge opportunities. As we know, there's challenges to them. Smaller lots and unit sizes. When we were at the housing summit, that was the name of the game. How do we do to increase supply with smaller lots, smaller unit sizes? And there's a number of problems that are out there to doing that, which is why you're not seeing it a whole lot. But maybe putting together a program that maybe when you get that pioneer in the market, it might help things go a little faster. Leverage that neighborhood mixed use zone. It's a new zone that the recode just established, or at least massaged into a new thing. And when we test that zoning, we find that could be a really opportunistic zone. And whether that's a rezoning, it's not everywhere in the city, but that seems to be planning staff a way to at least try to set up a zoning framework that gets that smaller units, that more neighborhood scale mixed use. And then don't overlook the Laurels and the Lockwoods of the world out there, those emerging outlying areas, and to perhaps take advantage of land economics that might be a little bit cheaper than other places. Okay, we'll try to get. I want to get through these site concept prototypes really quick. So this is where we've taken, and then of course, if there's any questions, please stop me. But we'll have plenty of time, I hope, here in a minute to talk about your questions and give everybody a chance. So these were, I'll go through these quickly, but we had we had a scope to test out 6 sites. It was 3 in kind of the Billings area, Yellowstone, and then 3 on the reservation. And we wanted to pick these sites so that they all hit a certain condition, but were also replicable. So that's why we call them prototypes. There actually are, we did find sites and we looked at these things like kind of like a developer, and had our design team test them, but we wanted to make sure that we pick ones that might be able to be replicated. So it's not just for one site or anything. And these aren't development plans, just concepts to see how these things work. Had a couple design principles, pretty standard stuff, but wanted to make sure that we were promoting good planning, good sound site planning and land use planning, but while still being realistic and compatible with local costs and conditions. So I'm just gonna get into these things real quick. This is one we usually like to start with. This is, as everybody is probably familiar, modeled after a site in eBird. It's the Empire Steel site, former Empire Steel. If you've been on 6th, you've driven past it, I'm sure. It's a big old industrial building, big steel metal building, and it's currently for sale. We like this one because a number of reasons. One, we do believe it's been cleaned up to residential standards, but if it wasn't, that's just one of those brownfield funding opportunities to help with grant funding to do that project like this. We also know that people are interested in developing this site. Maybe even some people on the phone might know more about that than I, but speaking with the broker, and we've been working with a couple local folks, local realtors in Billings with this one, because initially we had a concept that was about 250 units. What we're hearing is that the density really needs to be pushed, which has its set of challenges. Obviously, it's kind of unprecedented. But what the development community wants to do is get to a unit count that's high enough and provide a ground floor opportunity for non-residential space so that people in this community, this new kind of community, which could be extended all across the whole corridor, which is what people are thinking, might be able to have a self-sustaining residential and non-residential mixed use. And that's the concept that we obviously promote. That promotes walkability. We're not far from downtown, but things like food and beverage might not be the ideal thing here because you want to support your downtown businesses. So this might be more of just what are the folks that might move into this new community as it develops need from a day-to-day basis, whether it's childcare or co-working space, those kinds of things. And so at some point you have to do something like structured parking to make that work. Surface parking is always great for saving costs, but in this particular one, it looks like to get to that, working with that back and forth that we had these discussions, and totally conceptual, but something like 320 units or so with about maybe 18,000, 20,000 square foot of non-residential space seems to be the sweet spot. And if you do it in a way where you have a market rate anchor, you might be able to leverage some of that market, income to promote market and mix of affordable and maybe even affordable ownership model here. It's difficult to mix different types and models, but we certainly see it in other parts of the state, even in Montana. This is one that we wanted to do. It's a 300 foot by 300 foot block on an old railroad town site, pretty typical, alley loaded. This one's from an example in Hardin. You also see it in Laurel, South 27th Street in Billings. So I wanted to test this one out. When we look at the numbers and look at some of the design concepts, it's something like if you do a this kind of three-story urban Main Street level scale, historic scale, you probably could do this on one block, potentially with about 40 units, 32 per floor, I think. If so, you can get up to something like 60 units, maybe 80, even 80 units, depending on how that scale works. Not having to go underground, you could do tuck-in parking and a mix of surface. Of course, it's replicable on the other block. If you happen to have a couple blocks, when I use opportunities to look at some of these, and we get a lot of pushback on this how is this ever going to work? It's really nice, but it's too expensive. But some of the programs and money that's available to do affordable housing projects, if you look elsewhere in the state, they do have there's ways to get some of these really good design concepts into these places too from an infrastructure standpoint. This is what we call suburban flats. This is one where you're on major commercial corridors. This is probably more of a LIHTC, low income housing tax credit model when we're looking at some of these things, but I wanted to, again, we're trying to promote a mix of unit types here, a mix of unit sizes. So that's where you have the kind of two-story townhome with alley loaded garages. Again, surface parking with tuck under to save money. Really difficult to do this underground. You do see it in some cases, but a lot of these multifamily ones, as I said before, they only work if you get some kind of parking reduction or just bigger subsidies to save on that cost. I think we just have two more. This is one that we've worked with Trust Montana on a couple projects, and this is one that would try to apply that to, say, a site in Columbus and Stillwater County, using what we see there. Again, this is trying to maximize that single family ownership that people love while getting that size down, so the cost is reduced as well, and being able to park it either with detached alley loaded kind of garages here or surface. And another huge design guide principle is to try to figure out how to do indoor community amenity space that serves the whole community as well as the development This would be a market rate anchor, perhaps. We've seen this start to work in Missoula, where you have like a 25-75 split of market to affordable, using that community land trust model, so that that ownership is spread amongst the land trusts. And this is on school district land, so obviously working with the institution, the school. Perhaps you give a percentage of those to teachers, or dedicated percentage of those to teachers, as they even have opportunities to expand their school in the next 5 or 10 years, as this becomes a neighborhood unit and a new neighborhood, as Columbus grows. Really quick, 2 more. This is one that we've seen the HRDC in Bozeman has done this kind of in Belgrade, that Belgrade smaller home model, that modular home, where they do have that on-site community amenity, which is, or at least they partnered with Head Start to have that community anchor there. If you're familiar with that project, it's kind of these tiny cabins, but let's see how much we can kind of get out of that model. And so this is one with modular attached and detached, so just a mix of those unit types with street parking. It's parked at about 1.5 stalls to 1 unit, and then have a mix of different types there. We know that there's challenges with modular. Some people say the lenders won't lend to them, but I think as time goes on, trying to push that level. I'd love to hear folks' thoughts on that. And finally, for the reservation, we found this condition, as mentioned in our land suitability. We want to really kind of think, how do we push the envelope with perhaps tribal housing, and working with the tribal entities to do that, to get local workers to help us with this, and use modular, but also push the boundary from a aesthetic and design and cultural heritage standpoint. So this is a site where we have these sort of single family, what you typically see, these modular units, and we know that there's a lot of community or family kind of group homes in this. So there's a couple of different ways to kind of deal with the bedrooms, or just have enough bedrooms so families can be supported. These 2-story duplexes are pretty new. They're from Fort Peck. But really, one of the case studies that we liked is the Good Earth Lodges that I mentioned, which was a partnership between University of Colorado and the local housing entity there, and the tribes, where they use those compressed earth building materials. And we looked at that case study and a couple other white papers that described what's going on in the world of housing they were provided by HUD and others. And we kind of like this idea, and we've pulled this, been asking a lot of folks about this, these pods, these kind of community amenity pods, where it's shared central space. We know that the importance of certain design motifs. So let's see if this is a replicable thing that you could take to different parts of tribally owned or trusted land, and apply this in a unique way that might offer you opportunities for some community space or community gardens, or other kind of communal space in between. So that is that. And just to, I know I wanted to talk about regional land trusts, or at least regional models, really quickly. So I'll give me 1 minute and I'll go through these. And this is what we've been really working on lately, is what does regional mean? What does regional entity and collaboration mean? And it means a lot. It can mean a number of things. We called around and got some good case studies from a couple of different places in the West and in the East part of the country. And the most effective in producing and supplying units from a regional standpoint is the regional land trust model, which you do have some great trust resources in the state already. But what would it take if the 5 counties got together and did something? Well, first thing the first step is to get a list of people who might be interested, gather and talk about it, and maybe it's not a formalized nonprofit at first. Maybe it's more of a collaboration entity that it has in its goals and its strategic vision to become a land trust, but certainly getting together, talking about it, seeing what options are out there, and then doing outreach. One of the big things about this regional land trust model, if you're familiar, it usually uses a local nonprofit web, and so we have that. That's one of the opportunities, and we'll talk about that in a second. But really having that network of local nonprofits and community organizations. Nonprofits key. It doesn't have to be a land trust that we've seen across the country, but having a land trust does seem to be a little bit easier. If you know, you kind of have your regional land trust that works with smaller land trusts. That's certainly what we see in places like Vermont that have done a good job of this. And then you build up, you have to have some seed funding, so you can build up a membership base of partners, nonprofits, businesses that self-assess a small fee to get going. And that's just good for administration and so on, getting maybe hiring people to do these things, hiring consultants. Other places have really got their seed funding going using revolving funds, even within a 5-county, 10-county area. And then there's other ways to do it too, lodging fees, other exactions, which are difficult in the state of Montana, but there are other ways to do it. Another huge part of how to is engaging the local lending community. That's how, you know, it almost always has to happen that way, but there is one example of where you don't have to necessarily have that, but it certainly helps. And then determining where that equity is going to come from is huge. That's certainly a little bit further down the line. And then you have to, as a nonprofit, developer, you create your development arm and your asset management arm. It's a lot of work to manage affordable housing projects, as some of you may know. It's very persnickety, from, you know, just managing all the tax reporting to your client, to your constituencies. It's really difficult. So having outside help or doing that with hiring a new position or a new person is huge. Quickly, a couple of examples, case studies we were looking at. The state of Vermont, I mentioned. State Housing Conservation Board was formed in the 80s. That's that kind of nonprofit of a nonprofit that oversees these local housing trusts. It's a statewide one. There's about 225,000 people in the Burlington, Vermont area, which is, you know, kind of in that scale that you're seeing there in Montana. It's actually pretty close to the 5-county region that we're seeing here. So scalable, but there's a lot of heritage and history of doing that in Vermont. So there's obviously challenges. But over those years, they've built 13,420 units, and they don't just do CLT, they do renter help. They do all kinds of good stuff, down payment assistance up to 25K, all kinds of really good programs that are in Montana too as well. But they that's an interesting model because of the way that they've webbed the nonprofits and got everybody to kind of pitch in a little bit to get started. And now they're really getting the ball rolling on these things. And I got a couple case studies here. This is the Butternut Grove condos, which is about 20 units, 18 3-bedrooms. They really went for that family scale, 3 and 2 bedrooms only. And they're permanently affordable. It's about 165,000 for a 3-bedroom, 3-bath there. And then Opal, which I think is of People and Land Trust Housing in Orcas Island, Washington. This is out west. The one thing I liked about this one is that they're on an island, they're very remote, not a huge population, but getting materials, supplies, labor is just as hard as it is in Montana. So one of the interesting things about this is that they do individual to individual lending. So the nonprofit does put people with other individuals. So kind of not necessarily a donation, but it's an interesting way that they link up folks. So that's just that was another way of doing it. Now, whether that would work in Montana and Billings and Red Lodge and Sweetgrass, Stillwater County, who knows, but there might be applications there. Opportunities and challenges we have for doing something like this in the 5-county region. Got a lot of land, that's available and publicly owned or institutionally owned to get underneath projects. And then the local support, volunteer spirit is huge. That's an ingredient you have to have for each one of these. You have the existing nonprofit networks. You have that demonstrated need. There's a lot of the challenges, mostly that deal with complex administration and the need for outside expertise to get these things going, and of course, seed money and just getting money underneath projects, getting that equity pool, which if you had state level support would be a lot easier, but there's a little bit of work to do there. So I just wanted to point out, doesn't have to be immediately formalized, but you know, there's a stepwise program here where you get representatives from each county, which we already have out there. Start talking it, start making a strategic plan, and then get moving. We got a couple other resources in this that we can provide to you. You can see the names of some of these places are a little bit different than Montana, but a lot of them are maybe what Montana is going to be like in the future. So encourage you all to look at some of these resources we provided that we can provide to you after this. And then the last piece is the local approach, and that's just to get started on a project. That's, you know, when we ask our outside experts in housing, this is a critical piece to getting started. Sorry. So, and you want to right size your scope, and we just want to give kudos to Red Lodge Area Community Foundation because they're doing that. They have a project out right now that is going to take a look at this kind of analysis, this land analysis, and then start thinking about what it would take to make a feasible project on a site within their community. So that's exactly, and I have this example, the one in Belgrade. Even something small, biting off a little bit, making sure it's the right size will really kind of get your momentum going. As you look at the longer term, more regional approach, get that short term local approach going, just like Red Lodge is doing there. I have these. We have these implementation tables, which is more of a stepwise flow of action for the region and for each county. I'll let you look at those kind of on your own. But they have a number of different actions. Some of them are to take that Red Lodge Community Foundation approach and get a project rolling. Some of them are a little bit more about having the toolkits available that Carson and his team provided. But we have those. We've set those up for each county. And tried to spread out. It's not just BRCD doing everything here. It's definitely going to be a collaborative effort, no matter what happens to get implementation going. We also spoke to some state legislation, but since just out of interest of time, the report does go through some of these, some of what you can do, what you can't do, and what you should do to get into your state legislator's ear with Montana Housing Coalition and others that are already doing that good work out there. Okay, so we just want to go right into questions. So that's a lot of information. I know I just have a couple of bullet points here that we're thinking about, but can answer any question. Can Carson and I get any questions you've jotted down over the course of this presentation? Let's go first. No questions. One of the things that we have questions is, where is the level of strategic planning that this 5-county region could do to get to this regional approach? Does it make sense to do an informal group and then have a strategic plan that says this is what we want to do eventually? Or do you think that the region's ready to jump right in and start to do something bigger? We know the needs there, so time is of the essence. What's the stepping stone? And then the last question, one of the other questions here, we kind of looked at these 5 counties as sort of, they're interconnected and we know that there's silos, but how do we make sure the communities don't compete against each other? If we're a developer, we're looking at the region. We want to obviously get a project in, but we also want to make sure that we can spread that opportunity out amongst our counties. So that's all. It's just kind of one of our ongoing questions out there. Anybody else? Is there anything else?
Dave, this
Yeah.
is Laura Drager. I have a question.
Sure.
I know in the realtor, at the Billings Association of Realtors, we're taking a look at some of these exact issues. And you guys obviously did this study for Beartooth Resource Conservation. I know Big Sky Economic, they're always looking at this stuff for labor, housing for labor workforce. How do we get all of these groups together so that we get a synergy?
That's the question. I think you look at what networks are there right now. A big part of that's going to be education. I think it's going to take a lot of effort to get local leadership to understand the importance of doing it and to give their own time maybe to some of these things. So I think you have to look at what's there. That group that we all got together in August of 2021, that seems like a great group. And if you design your panels perhaps to just focus just on the regional get-togethers, maybe that's a way that you do it. But look at what infrastructure you have from a human standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, and then get the subject matter into those meetings and those strategic sessions and think tanks, and then go from there. To some degree, it might be forming your own think tank. Throwing all the issues at the wall, playing the spaghetti game, and seeing what might work with the folks that are in the room.
Thank you.
I think that's really the big. It's a good point. That's the big next step. Is let's use this momentum to get that group to meet and figure out who that list is and where these groups are that are already meeting. Any other questions, technical questions, or we'll give, like I said, we'll make sure everybody gets a copy of this presentation, and as we make the final tweaks to any of the revisions to the report, there's a lot more in the report as well.
So Dave, will this be shared as a PowerPoint type presentation?
This is a PDF I'm showing you right here. So
Okay.
yep, it's a really big file size. So I'll try to get it down to a manageable size so that you can go through it.
Okay, perfect.
Dave, a question I have.
Sure.
I had a meeting about a month ago with the city, our administration and engineering. And what I came away from that meeting was on a different subject, and we were looking at some City of Billings properties for development. Is there just such a disconnect if we put these together and we don't have a solid group from the city or somebody that can give some guiding suggestions, because the way the cities are structured?
Right.
I mean, it was a huge disconnect, wondering why we couldn't do something when, say, zoning said great,
Yep.
fire said great, and then engineering says, wait, you can't do anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, and all three of those players aren't on their own playbook within the city.
That's a fantastic point, and it's something that we heard over and over too. And it's to nobody's fault. It's just a kind of a way that everything's set up at some point, right? I think we know that there are some infrastructure issues. We know that even on the Empire Steel site, they've been working with trying to get infrastructure going, and we know that some of the standards and things in place are preventing it. But I think what you do is you set up Billings is such a Billings, Yellowstone County is such a entity unto itself that kind of makes a good point. You kind of need to do a Billings focused session first with its departments and electeds, and I think it's an educational component again with some of the people that making sure you point out where these shortcomings are, and there's gaps. It's a gap analysis, right? What are the big boxes what's the checklist look like, and why is it so hard to check some of these boxes? And I think that's kind of the step one for Billings. And then if you can get Billings to get on the same wavelength, then they can have representation on maybe this 5-county board, or maybe or a 5-county entity, or maybe the focus is on Billings and then the 4 counties. Of course, there's a lot of leverage that you can have from Billings momentum to help the whole region. That's why we have a 5-county region. That's why the BRCD is the same region as HRDC and so on. So I hate to lose that regionality, but if the first step is Billings, then let's get the department heads together to understand what each one is trying to work with. Any other questions on anything? Does anything seem completely unrealistic and impossible to this group? Or does it make sense? Is there anything missing? Anything you want to see out of this? Again, I encourage everybody to look at some of these resources that we provided here, test these things, see if some of these ideas are valid. We're the study is 100% complete, but we're still have opportunities to clarify, of course. Anything.
So Dave, it seems to me that there's some opportunities for economic development with bringing in additional businesses in some of your multi-use plexes, in the prototypes.
Yeah.
And so will we have the economic development councils all involved?
Absolutely. And just to the extent that we can, we have included them even in these discussions to see if that stuff works. I mean, I know they're doing this right now. This is what you, even some of the folks on the phone are doing this, and don't let that good work go anywhere else than where it needs to go, and make sure that these mesh points are made a lot of this is just connecting dots, it seems like, particularly for Billings, Yellowstone County. And for all the nonprofits in the region, everybody's doing the work. And like I said, it's difficult to get people to, it's hard to, you want to make sure that people don't start working against each other or duplicating efforts. So that's the benefit of regional thinking, or at least just getting everybody in the same room, or at least discussing it as at another summit at the regional level. But the economic development entities with folks like Patty, for this one example, it's being done out there. Get that at community space, and then the others with the multifamily, as you're talking about. What is that opportunity for this one? And this one, really, I encourage you to kind of speak to your development community. This is what they kind of are thinking. So this one, it could be done subsidized, but there's people out there possibly thinking about financing this conventionally and doing this on a fully market rate, but trying to get that unit size down small enough so that it actually is below market. That's what folks are trying to do out there, as you probably all know, but there's difficulties in between. So that non-residential space, that's why it's kind of referred to it as non-residential and not necessarily retail, would have to take some help with the economic development community to find those tenants, and to find potentially funding sources to help them out, or help locals start their business there that they've been wanting to start, whatever it may be, childcare, salon, something along those lines, a personal service, not necessarily maybe small retail, the eggs, cheese, ibuprofen, more towards that personal services, so that you don't cannibalize in your downtown businesses. I would heavily encourage economic developer entities and folks to help out with that piece.
Dave, this is Joel Bertolino with Beartooth RC&D. How are you?
Good. Hi, Joel.
Good. I think we had a couple of questions in the chat box and some comments by Steve Arverskow. And I think he's, kind of the direction you're going with. Billings kind of starting their own group and identifying the gaps there is a great idea. And then using kind of the stakeholder group that Steve had put together, Steve Simonson had put together, and Myrna and JC, collaboratively to keep going forward on this. Seems like a good approach going forward, I think. And Steve Arverskow offering to assist us and going forward is a great direction, I think. I just wanted to make sure that we were answering all those questions in the chat box.
Thank you.
And of course, we're going to try and make this available to anybody and everybody who's willing to look at it. So we'll be trying to put this and the complete study on our website going forward, and make sure Big Sky EDA has copies, and anybody who wants to look at it has copies. I see there was a question on some of the information you were looking over on parcel D in Billings. I don't know if we can go back to that or not.
Yeah. This is great. Yep. Is there a question about it, or sorry, I'm just, let me see.
Yeah.
That is I think the Downtown Billings Association, partially owned, I think, and I think we have representatives from that group here, don't we? But that, and speaking with them as part of our stakeholder interviews, that site's been on the radar for a long time. Even going through the One Big Sky district thinking and conceptual thinking. You have that entity, the ownership there, the prime location. It is kind of like that. It's a half block that crosses an alley, I think, in real life. And a couple things here. Part of it is that we wanted to make sure we examined the downtown Billings site, and so that seemed like one of the ones that had, for a number of reasons, hit a lot of those parameters we were talking about: ownership, close to jobs, surface parking, so slightly underutilized, those kinds of things. I think it's in the downtown TIF district, isn't it? Maybe it's across the street. So that's kind of where that comes from. Ultimately, we went with concepts for others because of a number of reasons. Just kind of that analysis that we did when we line everything up. The other sites seem to have more feasibility just straight off the bat, and based on our principles that we're using. But if there's any comments on that side, I'd love to hear them. Okay, let's see. Unfortunately, my chat's a little bit, it's kind of hard to read for some reason. So let's see if I can get through anything else here. Why are you doing this? Oh, let's see. Are we recording presentation? Make it larger. Parcel D. So that's parcel D. Let's see. We use this information together to make progress, right? So thank you, Steve Overscow, for making those comments. Okay, that's all the questions from the chat, at least. So, wow, yeah, appreciate everybody's time and everybody's help throughout the process that have helped us here. Yeah, the PDF will be obviously much easier to see than potentially a grainy computer screen. So apologize for any difficulties anybody had there, but we'll be able to get this out to you. Joel or Myrna, can you provide me a list of those names, emails, and I can get that out after this. I don't know how to get it from. I think there was other folks that were on that joined the invite that I don't have emails for, but I'll make sure we get it out there. Okay. Any closing thoughts, final questions? Certainly, Carson and I are available by email as well. I will send that with the email so that if you want to have any follow-up discussions, please don't hesitate to.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate your time, and you as well, Carson. This was really a great presentation.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you for your work on that.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for showing up today, and yeah, everybody in the stakeholder group, and thanks to Dave and Carson, done a great job.
Yeah, and commend to BRCD for going through this effort and doing something that's kind of unconventional as far as a housing study goes. And so I want to make sure everybody knows that that's a really great thing that you all did to go down this path. So
Thank you.
I guess we'll give it a second so everybody can put their emails in the chat if, as Myrna has mentioned. Those of you who might not have emails for, please, if you could copy paste that in there, it'd be great. So. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'll just kind of let this go on in the background, but again, appreciate everybody's time.